Lily finds it unbelievable that Krishna would suddenly shoot Zenus in the head like that, but Krishna insists that she had a valid reason for doing it. Aside from Krishna's primary mission, she was also tasked with investigating a series of recent kidnappings in the region. Seeing that Zenus was a human and Lily was an elf, she immediately concluded that Zenus must have been the kidnapper, so her first instinct was to blast him. Krishna's logic has numerous flaws, so Lily quickly clarifies that Zenus essentially adopted her and she is staying here willingly. Krishna soon realizes she may have rushed to judgment, and upon further consideration it would indeed be strange for a kidnapping victim to appear as cheerful as Lily. Fortunately, the bullets Krishna used were non-lethal, so she assumed she didn't kill Zenus, though Krishna suspects he might have been knocked unconscious by the impact. Yet to her astonishment, Zenus seems completely unharmed. Krishna apologizes for hastily shooting him due to her mistaken assumption, yet she remains curious as to how Zenus survived without an injury. Zenus explains that he used defensive magic to block the bullet before it reached him, but Krishna doubts this, stating that ordinary defensive magic should never be capable of blocking her bullets. As far as Zenus is aware, his defensive spells should be ordinary, so he doesn't quite understand her point. However, throughout Krishna's career as the vice commander of the Royal Knights, she has witnessed numerous types of defensive magic. Krishna immediately recognizes that Zenus' shield matches that of a grand sorcerer. The moment Krishna mentions her position as vice commander of the Royal Knights, Zenus and Lily instantly becomes uneasy, realizing that her presence could cause significant trouble for them. However, Krishna has something specific she wishes to request from Zenus. Zenus agrees to speak with her, hoping to avoid further confrontation, but simultaneously sends a discreet warning to all his clients, urging them not to visit while Krishna is present. They all sit down together and Krishna explains to Zenus that she is undertaking the covert mission and would like his cooperation. Zenus insists that he doesn't wish to become involved, but Krishna argues that every citizen must cooperate with the orders of the knights. Given Krishna's unpredictable nature, Zenus figured refusing could end with another bullet to the face, so he reluctantly decides to go with her request. Then Krishna informs him that her mission is to locate a specific man and arrest him immediately upon identification. Krishna has neither a name nor a description, but the person she is after is the mediator responsible for ending the conflict between the various factions. Zenus chokes on his tea once he figures out that the individual Krishna is attempting to capture is actually him, but Zenus remains calm and inquires why Krishna is pursuing the mediator. Krishna clarifies that the knight's orders absolutely can't disregard someone who can create peace among the factions. But when Krishna resorted to aggressively questioning one of the locals, he refused to give her any information despite her threats. From Krishna's perspective, if the residents of the slums won't betray the mediator, it must imply he is a sinister mastermind who needs to be stopped. Zenus attempts to reason with her, suggesting this mediator may be deliberately keeping a low profile. So if Krishna simply leaves and abandons her search, he likely won't cause any issues. Then Krishna asks Zenus if he personally knows who the mediator might be, so Zenus quickly makes up an excuse, saying he is merely speaking intuitively. Regardless, Krishna insists that she can't just ignore the mediator, since Krishna received explicit orders from her commander, and anyone capable of ending the conflict between the factions represents too significant a risk to ignore. Lily intervenes and tells Krishna there is no need to worry about the mediator destabilizing the country, because his only interest is earning money through honest labor. Judging by how Lily describes the mediator, it sounds as if she knows him personally. Lily immediately panics and quickly assures Krishna that she doesn't know the mediator, causing Krishna to grow somewhat suspicious, but she decides to let it slide for the moment. As it's getting late, Zenus uses this as an opportunity to encourage Krishna to leave, but while he is escorting her out, Krishna notices something placed in the corner. Krishna finds it unusual that Zenus would position a bed in this spot, causing Zenus to grow anxious because it's actually the clinic's patient bed, prompting him to claim it's just an extra bed nervously. Upon hearing this, Krishna promptly asks Zenus if he would be agreeable to letting her use it. Krishna is struggling to secure a base of operations within the slums, so she would greatly appreciate it if Zenus allowed her to stay here until Krishna finishes her assignment. Of course, Krishna is more than willing to compensate him for the lodging. Zenus can't really decline without raising Krishna's suspicions, so he reluctantly agrees, and Carmilla finds the whole scenario amusing. Then Lily prepares some tea for their new guests, but Krishna struggles with hot items, so she blows on it to cool it down. Lily remains envious that yet another woman has appeared, taking Zenus' attention away from her. So to prove her dominance, Lily sits directly on Zenus' lap and asks him to stroke her head like usual. Zenus complies with Lily's request, but he is slightly puzzled by her sudden demand, prompting Carmilla to approach and inform him that Lily is feeling jealous. Zenus is caught off guard because Carmilla suddenly whispered into his ear while she was invisible, but Carmilla is intrigued by all the drama going on. Lily is determined not to let Krishna take away Zenith's attention, so Lily becomes even more affectionate with him than usual, asserting her dominance. However, Krishna doesn't seem to have an effect and just keeps blowing on her tea like nothing's happening. But eventually Lily fell asleep, so Zenith gently put her into bed and headed back to the living room to continue his conversation with Krishna. Zenith fills her in on the whole story about how he rescued Lily from the slave trader, adding that those scum were part of an illegal trafficking network operating around here. That explains why Krishna was so quick to pull the trigger earlier, but Zenith doesn't have any real intel on the traffickers themselves. Changing the topic, Krishna brings up something she is curious about. Given how Zenith must be an extremely skilled mage, having perfected his defensive magic, Krishna wants to know if someone could regenerate an entire arm if they put the same amount of effort into healing magic. Zenith starts to question whether healing an arm is really such a rare feat for a healer, but before Zenith can complete his thought, Krishna interjects, insisting that it should be impossible. The only individuals who could achieve something like that would be saints or healers of the absolute highest caliber. Confused about why Krishna is bringing this up, Zenith asks Krishna for an explanation. Then Krishna describes how she recently fought against Sophia, recalling that she severely damaged Sophia's arm during the confrontation. However, when Krishna saw Sophia again yesterday, her arm was fully restored. Krishna is convinced there must be a healer in the slums powerful enough to regenerate limbs. And if that is the case, it would make sense for someone like that to have serious influence over the faction bosses. Krishna intends to continue her investigation the next morning, hoping to discover some clues about this supposed evil healer, but Zenith doesn't understand why she automatically assumes the healer would be evil. Krishna seems to harbor a negative opinion of the slum, prompting Zenith to ask if she has a specific reason for feeling that way. Krishna admits she may have a biased perspective, but it stems from someone from the slums murdering her mother. Krishna's mother was a compassionate woman who genuinely wanted to help everyone she could. She frequently visited the slums and organized events to distribute food to those who couldn't afford to eat, but she simply didn't return one day. Since then, Krishna lost the ability to laugh or even show a slight smile, which is one of the reasons people started calling her the Iron Rose. According to the accounts of witnesses, Krishna's mother was murdered and robbed for her wedding ring, and learning this completely shattered Krishna. Her mother had saved countless lives from starvation, yet no one stepped forward to save her in her time of need. This tragic event motivated Krishna to join the Knight's Order and become an unstoppable hero who could deliver justice to the criminals living within the slums. The next day, Krishna leaves to continue her investigation, allowing Zenith to resume treating his patients. Sophia visits the clinic with a minor injury on her arm and asks Zenith to examine it. Zenith begins treating her but advises Sophia to be cautious since Krishna could return anytime. Speaking of Krishna, she suddenly appears at the clinic to ask for directions after getting lost on her way out again. As soon as Krishna notices Sophia, she immediately draws her guns, prompting Sophia to retaliate by pulling out her knives, so a brief standoff ensues between them. Then Krishna questions Sophia, asking if there is genuinely an evil healer assembling criminals to threaten innocent people. Sophia doesn't deny the existence of a healer but insists that he definitely isn't evil. While Sophia herself is a thief and doesn't strictly follow the law, she knows firsthand that some among the nobility are guilty of far greater crimes. Sophia is aware that Krishna is investigating the trafficking ring, and after conducting her own research, Sophia discovered that the mastermind behind it is an aristocrat. Initially, Krishna doesn't believe her, as the trafficking ring is known to operate primarily in the slums. But Sophia clarifies that this is merely a clever deception intended to mislead the Knight's Order from uncovering the true criminal behind it all. Krishna remains skeptical but requests that Sophia reveal who is responsible for the kidnappings, prompting Sophia to name a man called Calendar. Krishna finds this difficult to accept, considering Calendar is widely recognized as a generous philanthropist who prides himself on educating orphan children and thus could never be involved in child trafficking. Sophia expected that Krishna wouldn't trust her, given that Krishna sees everyone from the slums as criminals. However, the mediator has never treated them that way. Instead, he treats everyone fairly and consistently gives people second chances. Unlike Krishna and her misguided version of justice, Krishna becomes furious when Sophia insults her concept of justice, and she is about to fire her gun, but Zenith steps in front of her, demanding that Krishna lower the weapon. Krishna orders Zenith to step aside, but Zenith refuses, saying he can't allow harm to come to Sophia since she is his patient. Zenith apologizes for not being upfront earlier, but Zenith confesses that he is actually the mediator Krishna has been searching for. Krishna assumes Zenith is just lying to protect Sophia because there is no way he could possibly be a healing mediator. After all, Zenith has already demonstrated mastery over defensive magic, and there is no way he could also excel in healing magic. Zenith doesn't necessarily consider himself a master, but he is certain of his ability abilities in both healing and defensive magic, since both simply require him to enhance the body's natural processes. Krishna finds this explanation absurd and remains unconvinced that Zenas is the healer. Although it's evident that Zenas is siding with Zofia, out of respect for the hospitality Zenas provided her yesterday, Krishna decides to exit peacefully without engaging in conflict. As Krishna leaves, Lily notices she is heading towards the district inhabited by aristocrats, prompting Zenas to realize her destination suddenly. Krishna took Zofia's accusation against Calendar seriously, prompting her to visit his manor to investigate. Obviously, Krishna can't directly confront him about the child trafficking allegations, so Krishna fabricates an excuse for her presence. Krishna tells him that she has heard about a recent increase in theft in the area, and Calendar confirms he is experiencing difficulties with the Lizard Man gang lately. Then Krishna informs him that she plans to boost security patrols in response. However, before implementing these patrols, Krishna wishes to inspect Calendar's estate to gauge his current security measures. Calendar understands her reasoning and readily offers to guide her on a tour of his mansion. Krishna is then shown throughout the entire mansion, and after the tour concludes, Calendar asks her opinion on his security setup. Krishna praises him for his meticulous approach to safeguarding the estate, but something odd catches her attention during her inspection. Krishna requests permission to use the restroom before departing, and Calendar sees no issue with this, so she slips away from his office. Given Calendar's high social standing, extensive security isn't unusual, but Krishna finds it peculiar that so much effort has been devoted to protecting the backyard area. Suspecting something might be hidden there, Krishna sees over the wall and quickly notices a hidden entrance. Krishna cautiously makes her way down the passage, and to her shock she realizes Zofia was telling the truth, that Calendar truly was behind all the kidnappings. But before Krishna has the chance to aid the captured children, Calendar sneaks up behind her, grabs the guns and blows off her arm. Calendar laughs at how effortlessly he managed to defeat a knight, taunting her for poking her nose where it didn't belong. Now Calendar simply needs to finish her off and resume his trafficking business. But just as Calendar is about to make his next move, Zofia and Zenas arrive. Zenas had become concerned when he realized where Krishna was headed, so he asked Zofia to lead him there. Calendar is determined to leave no witnesses, so he switches Krishna's gun to lethal mode and shoots Zenas straight in the face. Yet to Calendar's complete disbelief, Zenas remains unharmed, though Zenas admits the lethal shots did sting quite a bit. Calendar panics and attempts to escape, but drops the gun in his frenzy, allowing Zenas to pick it up. Calendar immediately begins begging for mercy, and luckily for him, Zenas has a strict no-kill policy. However, Zenas doesn't have any rules causing pain, so he switches the gun to non-lethal and fires directly at Calendar's head, knocking him out. Zenas quickly moves to Krishna's side, but Krishna weakly tells him it's pointless because her arm is gone and a large portion of her stomach has been blown away. Krishna has accepted her death, but Zenas reassures her she'll be alright, though he is definitely going to charge her heavily for his services, so Krishna should brace herself for an expensive bill. Moments later, Krishna is fully healed, astonished by Zenas' ability to repair such critical injuries instantly. Krishna finally accepts that Zenas was truthful about being the mediator, but her interest in arresting him has vanished entirely, as she now views him as a genuine hero. However, Zenas doesn't consider himself a hero at all. Zenas was simply a healer doing his job by ensuring nobody died. If anyone deserves to be called a hero, it's Krishna herself, because she was the one who first took action for the children's sake. Krishna might have been misguided occasionally, but deep down she genuinely cares and wants to create a better world. Zofia and the lizard men assist in freeing the children from the dungeon, but with the royal knights approaching fast, Zenas isn't interested in dealing with them, so he decides to leave with the others. However, before Zenas departs, Krishna stops him, curious why he decided to save her despite her being an enemy at the time. Zenas simply replies that he wanted to ensure Krishna pays her outstanding bills. Krishna still owes him money for the night she spent at his clinic, and now there is the additional cost of healing. Zenas expects full payment by the week's end. Krishna, amused by his ridiculous reasoning, laughs for the first time since the loss of her mother. The next day, Zenas and Lily were strolling along the street discussing their plans to buy some tea, when suddenly he noticed a place Zenas used to occupy back in the slums, reminding him of his past. Zenas had been a destitute orphan living in the slums with nothing, spending all his time just sitting around in an alleyway. One day Aston was wandering through the slums trying to choose a child, but thus far he was frustrated because none appeared suitable enough to serve as human shields. At that moment, Aston notices Zenas and decides he is perfect, approaching and initiating a conversation with him. Aston asks Zenas if he wants to join him on an adventure. Aston speaks politely, leading Zenas to think Aston is genuinely nice mistakenly. Despite this, Zenas hesitated to accept because it is rare for slum people to become adventurers. However, Aston assures him that as long as Zenas possesses the skills he can accomplish anything. Then Aston asks Zenas if he has any particular skills, to which Zenas responds that he knows some healing magic. Aston laughed after hearing this, since mastering healing magic typically takes years, making it impossible for a random orphan to learn it independently. Nevertheless, whether Zenas truly knows healing magic or not doesn't matter to Aston, because he intends to use Zenas merely as a distraction if anything goes wrong. Once Zenas agrees to join him, Aston takes him into the forest. There they confront a wolf monster. During the battle, Aston gets slightly injured, prompting Zenas to heal him using his magic. Then Aston charges the wolf and Zenas employs his healing magic again to enhance Aston's speed, enabling Aston to decapitate the wolf effortlessly with a single strike. However, Aston fails to notice that his injuries healed mid-combat, or that he suddenly moved faster at a crucial moment, leaving him convinced that Zenas is utterly useless. After several years of enduring this, Aston eventually expels Zenas from the party. However, Aston's group hasn't fared quite as well, because after removing Zenas, Aston and the remaining party members set out toward a cave for their next mission. This mission holds significant importance as they intend to leverage it to curry favor with influential nobles within the kingdom, though they all think it is a waste of time. Then Yuma says that the quicker they finish their task, the quicker they can return to the inn and resume drinking. Andres feels thrilled because ladies always come around them whenever they say they're members of the Golden Phoenix Party. After all, their team is renowned for successfully finishing quests and defeating magical creatures without taking any damage. Right at that moment, they encounter the creatures they're here to defeat, so Aston unsheathes his blade and prepares to strike. Aston instructs Guile to cast protective magic on him while he rushes ahead, and Guile does precisely that. But even while Aston is battling the wolves, his arms still get scorched. At the same time, out back, Yuma is being attacked by one of the wolves and he is badly injured. Aston shouts at Andres to quickly cast some offensive spells, but it takes a long time to finish chanting the incantation, and Aston is blasted by a fireball spell. Aston is stunned and questions whether his group has always been this incompetent, but it's evident they won't win this battle, so he commands everyone to withdraw immediately. Once they are out, Aston questions his teammates about their difficulty against monsters barely reaching B rank, but Andres reminds Aston that he wasn't particularly effective against the wolves either. Guile asks Aston if there is a chance Zenas had been truthful when he claimed he was healing them, but Aston finds it impossible since there is no way a lowly commoner like him could have possibly mastered healing magic. Still cautious, Aston thinks it might be wise for their group to recruit a healer. Several days later, they go back to the cave after recruiting a healer, whose name is Yuman. Yuman informs Aston up front that she is not skilled at battlefield healing. Yuman typically provides healing services only in the capital, but she coincidentally possesses an adventurer's license, so Yuman agreed to accompany them. Still, Yuman wonders why the Golden Phoenix would even require a healer given the reputation for completing missions without injury, but Aston refuses to explain what occurred, telling her instead to mind her affairs. Then Guile questions Yuman about whether Yuma will recover, as he was severely injured by the wolves last time. Yuman was the healer who treated him, so she is confident Yuma will survive, but considering how critical his wounds were, there is no possibility of him ever returning to adventuring. Yuman assumes Aston would show some sympathy toward a teammate who became permanently crippled, but he simply moves past it, stating Yuma wasn't valuable enough to keep around anyway, and why this quest holds such significance. A nobleman requested a scarf made from a fire fox's fur as a present for his daughter. If completing it places Aston in Lord Fennel's favor, he is prepared to put his life on the line for that scarf. Yet barely 2 seconds afterward, the plan crumbles because the wolves launch an unexpected ambush. Aston quickly retaliates and tells Guile to apply defensive spells to everyone, but as Aston moves into attack, he can't land a single blow against any of the wolves. The wolves then unleash 4 fireballs at him, and Aston manages to deflect 3. But the 4th fireball strikes Andres in the stomach, knocking him out immediately. Aston continues swinging angrily at the wolves, but soon Yuman shouts that they must withdraw because Andres' condition is critical. Aston can't believe everything is collapsing yet again, and when they finally get outside, he snaps at Guile, demanding to know why he failed to shield Andres with defensive magic. However, Yuman points out that Guile's defensive spell was indeed effective, and without it, Andres would have been instantly killed by a blast of that magnitude. Aston impatiently demands that Yuman heal Andres right away, but Yuman informs him that's impossible, as only top-tier healers or saints can heal such severe wounds without proper preparation instantly. Unless they rush Andres to a medical facility immediately, he won't survive. Sometime later, Aston speaks with Lord Fennel's servant, who informs him that Lord Fennel is extremely disappointed. Aston desperately asks for another opportunity, certain he can secure the fur for the scarf if given one more chance. But the nobleman's daughter's birthday has already passed, making the whole matter pointless. The real reason behind Lord Fennel's dissatisfaction isn't merely that Golden Phoenix failed the quest, it's because Aston repeatedly promised he'd succeed. If Aston simply informed Lord Fennel earlier that the mission couldn't be accomplished for any reason, the Lord would have understood and chosen a different gift for his daughter. But that's not what Aston did, so for a brief moment Aston tries shifting the entire blame for this disaster onto Zenas. However, Aston soon recalls he never formally registered Zenas as part of the party, so officially Zenas was never recognized as a member, meaning he can't be held accountable for anything. Swallowing his pride, Aston has to bow his head and apologize for the whole mess. And he seethes inside, hating every second of having to degrade himself in front of a servant. Then Aston vows he will find a way to make amends, but Lord Fennel's servant questions how exactly Aston will accomplish that, considering half his group is already nearly dead. Aston confidently replies that he intends to recruit replacements to offset their losses, and the next time Lord Fennel entrusts them with a task, Aston will ensure its successful completion. Afterward, Lord Fennel's servant departs. Gal asks Aston if making such promises is really a wise move. After all, they currently have no prospects on capable recruits, and there is no possible way for them to undertake missions with just 2 remaining members. Aston tells Gal there is no need for concern as he already has something in mind. Even though Aston still doesn't believe Zenas holds much value, he can't deny the team function much better. While Zenas was with them, Aston plans to bring him back simply. Aston is convinced Zenas would jump at the chance to rejoin Golden Phoenix, despite how poorly he had been treated previously. The following day, Aston and Gal enter the slums searching for Zenas. But since they have absolutely no idea where to begin, Aston suddenly gets a brilliant idea. Aston decides to employ the 3 faction bosses to help locate Zenas, confident they will agree because low-class people like them will do practically anything for cash. A short while later, Aston has a lizard man guide him to Zofia, saying he is interested in hiring her services. Zofia isn't particularly enthusiastic since this interferes with her daily clinic hours, but she is at least open to hearing out a paying customer. Aston introduces himself as the leader of Golden Phoenix, explaining to Zofia that he is searching for a man named Zenas who arrived in the slums around 2 months prior. At first, Zofia couldn't believe what was being said, since Zenas had informed her all about how Aston kicked him out of Golden Phoenix, which had already seemed foolish, but she never imagined Aston would be stupid enough to search for Zenas afterward. Zofia tells Aston to leave immediately because Zenas has far more important things to occupy his time than dealing with him, and honestly, even looking at Aston makes her sick. Aston becomes offended, briefly thinking about attacking Zofia, but quickly realizes he would get beaten if Aston tried anything, so he decides to return. After Zofia refuses to assist him, Aston approaches Linda's faction instead. But the moment she realizes who Aston is, Linda immediately tells him to leave. Aston is shocked to learn Linda also considers herself Zenas' friend, and in case he is considering making trouble, Linda reminds Aston that if she wanted, Linda could easily kill him 3 times over before Aston even had a chance to blink. Then Aston attempts to approach Loie for assistance, but she promptly tells him not to bother her like the others. Loie also threatens that if she ever hears Aston has been bothering Zenas, Loie will personally crush his skull between her thighs. Aston and Gal immediately exit Loie's cave, and Aston struggles to believe that all the faction bosses care about Zenas this much. Aston tries convincing himself that they must be referring to someone named Zenas because there is no chance that the Zenas he remembers could have such influence in this place. Speaking of Zenas, Gal coincidentally spots him walking along the street with Lily. Lily and Zenas just completed their shopping for the day and were preparing to return home when Aston suddenly called out to Zenas. Zenas is startled to re-encounter Aston and Gal, but he is not exactly thrilled to see them, so Zenas begins walking away. Aston stops him and loudly announces that he specifically came here to welcome Zenas back into Golden Phoenix. But before Aston can even finish his sentence, Zenas flatly rejects him. Aston can't believe this rejection since he is sure Zenas will jump at the chance to return to their party, but Zenas begins listing every bit of mistreatment he endured under Aston, including the terrible conditions and lack of pay. There is no reason for Zenas to rejoin Golden Phoenix, but if Aston is truly desperate, Zenas suggests he could tag along for a few missions if he is free. However, Zenas refuses to continue working merely for recognition, so Aston would need to offer him fair payment this time. Zenas demands 50,000 coins for minor healing and 1 million for major healing magic. In addition, Aston must pay separately for Zenas' defensive spells and buffs. But if Aston finds these terms unacceptable, there is nothing else to discuss, so Zenas once again begins walking away. Aston feels deeply insulted that Zenith dares to reject his offer, so he unsheathes his blade and attempts an attack, but before Aston can get anywhere close he is blasted back by Krishna. Krishna tells Aston that launching an attack right before a royal knight is idiotic. Krishna had actually come here looking for Zenith herself, but since Aston just attempted an assault she is now obligated to place him under arrest. However, Aston quickly points at Guile claiming he is the one who forced him into it, then immediately flees like a coward because Aston definitely doesn't want to end up imprisoned. After all that, Zenith and Lily return home for the evening and shortly afterward Zofia, Linda, and Loie arrive. They inform Zenith that Aston attempted to hire them to track him down, and even though they all rejected his request, Zofia remains concerned that he might persistently keep coming after Zenith. If Aston decides to approach the unlawful underground guild, he might even manage to hire an assassin to go after Zenith purely out of resentment. However, hiring assassins typically requires substantial funds, and considering Aston was desperate enough to seek out Zenith personally rather than recruit additional party members, Aston is most likely broke. Despite this, Zofia is still uneasy, as she hears unsettling rumors about a mysterious figure known as the conductor from the Underground Guild, who accepts assignments for free under specific circumstances. Thus, if Aston somehow convinces the conductor, it might spell serious danger for Zenith. Sometime later, Zenith finds himself unable to sleep because of all the tension caused by re-encountering Aston, prompting Carmilla to come downstairs to keep him company for some reason, since she is concerned about him. While Carmilla is there, she asks Zenith if it is actually true that he learned healing magic in the slums. Then Zenith explains that he initially tried resurrecting a corpse, after which healing magic came naturally. Carmilla says that resurrection magic is forbidden, but Zenith says he genuinely had no idea about the ban when Zenith first experimented with it. On the topic of forbidden magic, Carmilla remembers something resembling artificial life from her lifetime. It occurred during the Demon Lord's reign, and he frequently waged war using golems animated by forbidden spells. Right at that moment, Zenith hears chaos erupting outside, so Carmilla volunteers to investigate, and to her shock, she witnesses a significant portion of the slums engulfed in flames as a rampaging golem wreaks havoc. But it turns out Aston really was that petty because he actually tried to put a hit out on Zenith. And being broke, Aston couldn't afford to hire a professional, so someone pointed him in the direction of the conductor instead. The conductor said he would consider taking the job for free, but only after hearing the full story to see if it was even worth his time. Aston laid everything out, ranting in detail about what happened, and conductor couldn't stop laughing. Aston was a pathetic person and the whole thing was just sad. But still, the idea of targeting Zenith sounded fun and gave conductor a perfect excuse to test out one of his newest little creations. Back in the present, Zenith and Carmilla had just made it into the town, and up close, the scene looked way worse than they expected. Buildings were trashed and streets were torn apart. Then not long after, Linda, Loie, and Zofia come up asking Zenith for help, because the golem had seriously injured many of their people. Zenith asked if they had any clue where it came from, but they didn't know either. The only thing they'd seen was the golem coming from the far end of the slums, but that didn't explain anything. Hearing that made Zenith uneasy. If the creatures were coming from deep in the slums, the Underground Guild might have a hand in this mess. But now wasn't the time to speculate. So Zenith turned to the others and told them to gather all the wounded in one place so he could begin healing. Once Zenith was done with that, he swore he would make whoever caused this disaster pay for it. Meanwhile, the conductor was observing the devastation from a comfortable distance, feeling quite pleased with the golem's capabilities, though he noted its speed left something to be desired. Still, it could carry out the mission for a first test run. Conductor didn't know much about Zenith yet, but he was itching to see how the guy would react once his friends started dropping one after another right before him. Back inside the city, Linda, Loie, and Zofia rounded up their forces, ordering them to locate all survivors and bring them straight to Zenith. Once everyone was accounted for, Zenith got ready to cast. But before he did, he warned Carmilla to step back to avoid being affected by the spell. Then Zenith uses a high heal across the entire zone, and within moments people who were on the brink of death were back on their feet, and Zenith told them to evacuate the area as fast as they could. Then Zenith moved around personally healing anyone who hadn't been caught in the main cast range. Zenith was angry. Not only he had been dragged out in the middle of the night, but Zenith also had to heal so many injured people. And there wasn't even a guarantee he was getting paid for this. But one thing was certain, that whoever controlled that golem would answer for this. But they still had no clue who was behind it or why the attack was even carried out. Back with the conductor, and he is honestly shocked that Zenith managed to save every single injured person, because conductor was almost certain that at least a handful would die in the chaos. Just by watching, it was obvious that Zenith was a top-tier healer, but even with all that power, unless he shuts down the golem, the destruction will keep piling up. Zenas had just wrapped up healing the wounded, and with the area finally cleared out, the golem was still out there wrecking everything in sight. Zenas looked at Carmilla and asked if there were even a small chance the thing would get bored and wander off, but she denied it immediately. Golems are built to follow commands until the task is finished, and based on what they'd seen, this one had been told to tear the slums apart. It wasn't going to stop until everything was gone. What made it even worse was that high-grade mana stones, the kind needed to make golem cores, were supposed to have been completely wiped out during the Great War. So nobody should have access to something that rare anymore. Zenas had been hoping to rest, but clearly that wasn't happening. Zenas couldn't just stand around and let this golem trash the place, so he had to take care of it before the damage worsened. Then Linda, Loie, and Zofia stepped forward and offered to join him in the fight, but Zenas asked if they were sure, because he couldn't promise to heal them mid-battle if things went wrong. They understood the risks, but they weren't backing down. This was their home too, and they weren't about to watch it get destroyed. Zenas was glad to have them on board, but they couldn't charge him without a plan, so he asked Carmilla if she knew how to bring a golem down. Carmilla told him that unless they destroy the mana stone powering the core, the golem would just keep getting back up no matter how much damage it took. That was bad news for Zenas, because he had been hoping to sell the golem core later and make a little extra cash, but there was no other option. So Zenas gave the order, hit the golem with everything they had, and he would handle the support, so the girls didn't waste a second and rushed in. Zenas buffed them with an agility spell to boost their movement speed as they advanced. Right before they engaged, Zenas followed up with a strength enchantment, and that gave them just enough raw power to blow out one of the golem's legs completely. The heavy chunk of enchanted stone shattered and the golem lost its balance, slamming into the ground. But the wind didn't last, because the moment it hit the dirt, its core lit up, and before anyone could even take a breath, the golem started regenerating again. Then Golem throws Linda so hard that she gets launched straight through 3 buildings before crashing to a stop. Realistically, Linda should have had every bone in her body broken from that hit, but thanks to Zenas' magic she walked away without a scratch. It had been a long time since Zenas had been in an actual fight, so he was a bit out of shape. But that was quickly wearing off. Zenas just had to remember 2 things. First, if he strayed too far from the group, his enhancement spells wouldn't reach them. Second, since healing, speed, and power buffs each had a different cast sequence, Zenas couldn't activate them all together, so he would need to rotate them in real time based on the flow of combat. After a few minutes, Zenas realized that the golem hadn't regenerated instantly. If they hit it hard enough all at once, it would stay down at least for a bit. Then Zenas shouted for the girls to break both its legs, and once they did, the thing started toppling over again. But just as it was falling, something went wrong. Zofia suddenly yelled that a kid was trapped inside one of the nearby houses, and the golem would crush her. Zenas tried to reach her, but she was too far. Zenas couldn't throw a protection spell across that distance in time, so he sprinted toward her hoping to pull her out. But Zenas didn't make it, and the girl should have been dead. But then somehow the golem stopped itself mid-fall and avoided hitting her. That wasn't normal, because golems weren't built to care, and according to Carmilla, they didn't have the cognitive ability to protect people. So something was clearly off about this one. Zenas scanned the golem, and there was Aston trapped inside. The conductor was caught off guard by how fast Zenas put the pieces together. Still, conductor didn't care, because Zenas knew this wouldn't change a thing. The mana crystal conductor used was flawed. It couldn't make a standard golem independently, so conductor used a human as the core instead, and Aston had been the perfect lab rat. The conductor lured him and planted the crystal in his chest and used him to generate a functioning golem core. From that point on, Aston and the golem became permanently fused. Now the conductor was watching closely, curious to see how Zenas would react. After saving all those lives, will you really be able to kill someone? Zenas took a long breath, then calmly told the others to clear the battlefield. The girls hesitated because they didn't understand why Zenas wanted them to back off when they were seconds away from finishing the fight, but now that Zenas knew what was truly happening, he realized that this wasn't something they could handle together, and it was something only Zenas could face. Although they didn't grasp the full situation, they trusted Zenas' judgment and withdrew from the field without question, giving him the space he needed. Once the others had cleared the area, Zenas faced Aston and said it was time to end this once and for all. Their whole connection started when Aston picked him up out of the slums, but even back then it was all self-serving. Still, the moment Aston saved that little girl, something shifted. Zenas remembered what Gal had once told him. Aston's obsession with wealth and power stemmed from a tragic past. When Aston was a kid, his little sister died because he didn't have enough coins to pay a healer, and since then, Aston had been chasing money and power like a madman. That girl must have reminded him of his sister, which is probably why Aston instinctively intervened. It doesn't make up for all the things Aston had done, but it makes Zenas wonder maybe there is still a sliver of humanity buried in there somewhere. But right now, Aston was out of his mind and Zenus didn't have time to figure out if he could be saved, so he pulled out his scalpel. Then Aston tried to crush him on the spot, but Zenus dodged and morphed the scalpel into a blade slicing clean through both of Aston's arms. Then Zenus leaped into the air and tore open the golem's chest, exposing Aston's real body. Zenus hated doing this, but he had to make sure Aston couldn't cause any more chaos, so Zenus slashed him across the torso. The conductor watched in silence, genuinely surprised that Zenus had gone through with it so decisively, but then again, based on what conductor heard, Aston had treated Zenus like crap for years, so maybe this was personal or even revenge. But that wasn't it, because what Zenus was actually doing was way more precise. Zenus was targeting only the parts of Aston that were fused to the mana core. Zenus was surgically severing them, not killing. Once those parts were cut, Zenus moved in and started healing Aston's body. The conductor was stunned because pulling off something like this took ridiculous precision and focus. And Zenus had just healed a whole city not 10 minutes ago. Zenus himself didn't even care that much if Aston lived or died. Zenus wouldn't lose sleep either way, but somebody had to pay for the destruction and Zenus knew well Aston was too broke to pay for the damages himself. So Zenus refused to let him die, not until he spilled the name of the person who created the golem. Even if Aston was scum, Zenus couldn't ignore the fact that if he hadn't received that coin, Zenus never would have been able to save Lily, and his clinic wouldn't exist today. More importantly, Zenus had sworn to save as many lives as he could. That oath extended even to Aston. Then Zenus raised his blade one last time and brought it down in the mana crystal, shattering it completely and freeing Aston from the golem once and for all. Things finally calmed down after all the chaos, and once Aston came to his senses, everything hit him. For the first time, Aston really understood how insane Zenus' abilities were. While trapped inside the golem, Aston had stayed partially conscious just enough to witness Zenus coordinating the leaders mid-fight like some kind of battlefield tactician. That is when it hit him, Zenus must have been doing the same thing back when he was part of Aston's old party. Getting turned into a puppet and used like trash made Aston realize just how much of a scum he had been all along. Aston knew no apology in the world could erase what he did, but still had to try. However, Zenus wasn't having it. Zenus couldn't stand watching Aston stutter out halfway regrets. Zenus told him to lift his head, not because he forgave him, but because Zenus wanted to land one clean hit before heading home. Zenus had been dying to hit Aston in the face for years now, and knocking out a half-conscious guy just wouldn't have felt satisfying. But that he was awake, though nothing was stopping him. So Zenus cast a 10 strength buff, stepped forward slowly, and unleashed the most strongest punch of his entire life. Aston went down cold, and a few hours later Aston woke up with a pounding headache and Krishna standing over him. Krishna calmly informed him that she had already met Zenus earlier, so Krishna had a pretty good idea of how everything went down. Then Krishna added that Aston was lucky no one died or he would have murder charges right now. That said, Krishna was still placing him under arrest for a whole list of things: property damage, assault, and somehow public indecency, because apparently Zenus' punch had knocked every last piece of clothing clean off his body. Krishna also mentioned that Zenus left a few parting words for him. The first message was, Zenus had taken Aston's sword while he was unconscious. It was a well-crafted blade, and selling it should be enough to cover all the damages Aston caused. Then Krishna told him there was one more message and instructed Aston to look at his hand. When Aston opened it, he saw a single gold coin. Zenus' idea of severance pay, so that was it. With that coin, Zenus never wanted to see or hear from him ever again. Aston sat there, eyes to the ground, feeling completely gutted. Aston knew well he deserved it, but now Aston really had nothing left. After everything that went down, Zenus could barely stand. His legs were shaking, and he was barely able to walk. The others offered to carry him home, but Zenus insisted they didn't have to. Zenus figured they were just as tired as he was. Still, the girls didn't listen. After all the time Zenus had carried them literally, it was their turn to return the favor. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, Carmilla had already filled Lily on everything that had happened. So when Zenus finally arrived home, Lily greeted him warmly and asked if he'd like a cup of warm tea. So now what will happen next? Subscribe to our channel to find out what will happen next. Friends, before we wrap up, we've recently launched a membership program where you can enjoy perks like early access to videos and exclusive content just for members, and many more to enhance your interactions. If you're interested, consider joining our membership. To enjoy these benefits, check out the link in the description to join. So friends, if you enjoyed our recap video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.